artificial nails. We're going to do sculptured nails, which are also called acrylic nails. We're going to do nail tips. And in applying nail tips, we use three options for an overlay over the nail tip. Either we use the acrylic or sculptured overlay, or we use the silk or linen wrap. In applying a set of nails, you first want to check the cuticle area to make sure there are no openings and there is no broken skin. You will be using various chemicals around the nail and therefore want to be very careful not to let any chemicals get into any open areas. If it is a very bad opening or even questionable, you want to wait until the opening heals, the wound heals, before applying artificial nails. You then want to make sure all of the nail polish is removed from the surface of the nail, a clear polish as well as colored polish. We are first going to apply sculptured nails. After you have checked the cuticle area, remove the nail polish, then you should sand or buff off the oil, the natural oil, from the surface of the nail. This will help the acrylic nail to bond. Make sure in working on top of the natural nail with your file or buffer, you work very lightly because you can cause damage to the surface of the nail. You're simply doing this process to remove the oil, not to take any of the surface of the nail off. We use a paper form for extending a sculptured nail. Primer should be applied to the surface of the nail bed before placing the form in place. You should go ahead and at least do one hand in primer. You will reapply the primer at a later time immediately before applying the acrylic product. You want the paper form to fit flush against the underside of the nail. Do not want any gaps or openings under that natural nail. The direction in which you arch this form will determine the curvature of the nail. For an example, the nail has a slight downward slope, and this is probably the most natural looking nail. If, however, you wanted to direct that slope in an upward position, you would simply redirect the end of that nail to send it in an upward position or in a straight out position. In placing a paper form under a nail, you want to get this paper form, the front end here, in the curvature of what I call a C. That C will represent the underside of the artificial nail. In pushing that C under the natural nail, pull the arms, the wings of your paper form down on both sides, which pushes the front end of this form in an upward position to fit neatly, snugly under the surface of the natural nail. Notice that the wings do not lap over on the top, but do stand up on the side of the nail. Notice that the surface of the natural nail has dried. This product adheres better to a natural nail if the surface of the natural nail has been moistened with primer. Be careful not to allow the primer to run into the cuticle area, for it is an acid and it will burn the skin. In applying the sculptured nail, you want to use, in this case, a medium-sized ball of acrylic. You drop the ball on the paper form right at the tip of the nail, not on the nail, but right at the tip of the nail. After you drop your ball at the tip of the nail, you then stroke your brush to clean it and start patting the acrylic into a square-shaped nail tip. Use the lines on your nail form for judging the length and the width of the nail. Continue to pat and mold the nail tip into a square shape. And as the acrylic starts to harden, stroke and blend the acrylic nail tip onto the natural nail. The second ball for this nail should cover the natural nail bed surface. Drop that ball in the center of the nail. Allow it to start flowing toward the cuticle area. Continue to pat and push the acrylic into the cuticle area down the sides. And again, as the acrylic starts to harden, stroke it so it will smoothly flow down to the first acrylic ball that formed the tip of the nail. Checking the nail from all angles, making sure you have a good curvature on top of the nail. Smooth each acrylic ball as you go so as to have a smooth surface at all times. We will repeat that on the second nail. And again, we will prime the nail. Forming my C in the paper form and pushing it snugly underneath the natural nail, pulling the arms down the side. Notice that I'm using my ring finger on my holding hand to support the paper form underneath so that the form stays under the natural nail during the entire nail application. Notice this is not a stroking motion initially. Initially it's a patting motion. Patting and pushing the acrylic where you want it to go. I'll start stroking it at this point as I feel the acrylic product begin to harden. Pushing it up to form the square nail using the same lines for length as I used on the first nail. Again, the second ball is dropped in the middle of the nail. You begin to pat and push upward, outward, to cover the entire surface of the natural nail bed. And then as it hardens, start to lightly, very lightly, stroke the acrylic down to get a smooth joining of the second and the first balls. There may be times when you need to go in and reinforce the sides, the corners, which are the stress points. This is where a nail is more likely to break, and you can give it a little extra protection without making the nail look too wide. Also, you may need to apply more to the surface of the nail to give it a better curvature, to keep from building a flat nail, but always blending and smoothing each ball as it is applied. We will return to the first nail and get the sculptured nails applied before moving on to the nail tips. Always build a square nail, because some fingers grow off into various directions. You need to move the hand into another position to do the proper shaping. So at this point in filing the nail, you're striving to file the nail into a perfect square. I'm working with the width of the nail, using the natural corners as a guide so that the artificial nail will look natural and not be too wide. Notice in filing around the cuticle area, it can be very painful to your customer if you file their cuticles, and it can even cause them to bleed. It does happen, but you strive not for it to happen. In filing the side of this nail, you want to be careful to file straight up and straight back, not curving in at this point. In filing straight up toward their knuckle, as you get to the curve going around the back side of the nail, lay the file over and stay right in the groove. The groove is the space between the cuticle and the end of the side of the artificial nail. Therefore, in applying the acrylic and applying the second ball, make sure the acrylic does not roll all the way up to the cuticle area. Leave yourself about a 1/16 of an inch of exposed natural nail, thereby leaving you room to file flat around the cuticle area, blending the artificial nail down into the cuticle, looking very natural. Notice the holding position, the hand that's holding the finger. I'm using my thumb here to pull this cuticle down on this far side to give myself more filing space there. Also, if my file does touch anything on that side, my thumb is so close that it touches the thumb instead of her cuticle. On this side, the near side here, I'm using this index finger to pull that cuticle down, again allowing myself more room to file the artificial nail smoothly around the cuticle. As I work around the finger, I'm laying the file over so as not to push too hard on the cuticle. In filing, as much as possible, you want to use long strokes, and that cuts down on the amount of energy you expend in filing a nail. You want to use a sanding motion versus a filing motion in working on the surface of the nail. That does speed up your time. Work around the nail in that you should not work on the same part of the nail too long. The filing generates heat and will cause a burning sensation to the customer if you file in one area too long. So work around the whole nail, moving back and forth until all areas are smooth, not showing any pits or any humps in the nail. Constantly turn the nail from side to side, checking it from all angles. We will be doing a final shaping of the nails once the whole hand has been applied. At this point, we're working the nail into a perfectly square nail. We will move on to applying nail tips. In applying nail tips, you want to size the finger. The nail tip should cover from one side of the finger to the other, as wide as the natural nail. Nail tips are numbered, the largest size being 0, the smallest size being 10. When I find a nail tip that's too small, I go up to the largest size. In this case, size 3 is too small, so I will go to a size 2. I discovered earlier that size 2 is too large for the nail, so we need to take the larger of the two sizes and trim it to fit the nail. Also, the overlap of this nail is too great. There is a well on the inside of this nail tip that should fit snugly against the free edge of the natural nail. When we do position that nail tip in that fashion, the overhang of this nail tip is too great. Therefore, I tailor it so that this nail tip overlaps about halfway up the nail bed. We now apply a large bead of glue on the lower half, bottom half of the nail. Notice that I'm tilting the nail in a downward position so that if any glue should run, it will run toward the tip and not back into the cuticle area. I will now place the nail tip at the edge of the tip of the welt and roll it up onto the natural nail. Roll it up. The reason you roll it up is so that the glue will spread out evenly in an upward position. Also, if you do not have enough glue on the nail, the top half across the middle of the nail bed, glue and air pockets will form there, and then you can simply go back and allow the glue to run into the back side of the nail. If, however, air pockets form toward the tip of the nail on the natural nail, there's no way the glue can run down to fill in those air pockets, and so therefore it's important to roll the nail tip up onto the surface of the natural nail. Again, the overlap is great, and I'll trim this nail tip so that it overlaps just about half of the natural nail. If when you're starting to roll the nail tip up and you discover you do not have enough glue, so you see air pockets, you pull the nail tip up very quickly so that it will not adhere, and you just simply add more glue to the bottom half of the natural nail. And you roll it up, watching the glue spread out evenly. Once all of your nail tips are in place on that hand, cut the nail tip to the desired length. In cutting a nail tip, always remember not to cut the nail tip head on in this fashion. This will tend to make the nail tip split down the middle. Always go in from the side and snip the nail tip on both sides. If there's any remaining connected, you simply twist it off. Now you file down the nail tip, getting the width and the length as close to the desired width and length as possible. You also want to take all of the shiny surface off of the nail tip. Any overlay will adhere better if you take the shiny surface off of the nail tip. You also want to go ahead and file down your seam line where the plastic tip ends or lays on the natural nail. Be careful in filing down this seam line. You are filing partially on the surface of the natural nail, and it can be very painful if you overfile the surface of the natural nail. Remember to keep your file flat in filing down the seam line, not tilting it down into the natural nail, but keep it flat so you are in fact filing down the surface of the plastic tip and not filing on the natural nail. You do want to be cautioned, however, that you can overfile a nail tip. You can file it too thin on the surface and will make the nail tip very weak. I think about laying the foundation of a house, in that if the house has a weak foundation, anything you put on top of that foundation is going to crumble. That is true of an artificial nail. The nail tip is your foundation, and do a very good job of gluing the nail tip down, absent of air bubbles, which show up as little white pockets. And not overfiling the nail tip so that you would have a solid foundation for your nail. Now that we have the nail tips applied, we will go ahead and demonstrate the 3 overlay processes. The first nail that has the nail tip, we will apply an acrylic overlay and sculptured overlay. Again, we use the primer. The primer dries the oils on the surface of the natural nail. It does not harm the nail tip to apply primer to the nail tip, but it's not necessary. I drop my ball. I clean my brush. Remember, you cannot apply a smooth acrylic nail if you have chunks of acrylic in your brush. It's important to stop and get your brush cleaned out if you find acrylic is drying in your brush. I've used 1 ball here of acrylic to overlay the surface of the nail bed and the plastic nail tip. You may want to take 2 balls for that process, depending on your level of skill. That's your acrylic overlay. On the other 2 nail tips, we're going to wrap, one with linen and one with silk. Linen is thicker than silk. And after application, you still, in fact, can see the fibers of linen on the nail. Linen, however, is